Hello everyone, my name is Gavin and this is the Orthodox Heathen, the channel where we take a look at and answer questions from the lore. Today's video is a little bit different than the ones that we've been doing. Today's video is not about theology, but rather the heathen community. More specifically, how the heathen community interacts with the general world community as a whole. Now, the topic of today's video is normalizing heathenry. What does it mean to normalize something? To normalize something is to demystify it in mainstream society, to bring it out, to make most people familiar with it. Normalizing heathenry and normalizing paganism as a whole will make our lives significantly easier. Now, I began to think about this when I was thinking about my children. I'm the father of two beautiful babies, and I was just thinking about the world that I grew up in. I converted to heathenry at a very young age, and I got to see the disparity between my beliefs and the beliefs of my Christian peers. They could talk about their beliefs in public, they could have conversations, and it wasn't weird. But when I would talk about my beliefs, it would be met with sneers and jeers and laughs, and that's not necessarily the fault of my Christian peers, but rather the fact that our religion has not been normalized. While you can have a man turning water into wine and walking on water seem to be perfectly acceptable to some people, the idea of landvættir or alfar is completely outlandish, because we have yet to normalize ourselves. And that is the topic of today's video, building a better world for our children and for our grandchildren by normalizing heathenry. And so first, before we get started here, I want to address the people who have heard the introduction and are now thinking, well, I'm a solitary practitioner, or I'm in the closet, or I don't care because I don't care what society thinks about me. That's completely and totally fine. You're welcome to feel that way. And don't let me compel you to feel anything else if you don't want to, or compel you to action if you don't want to take any action. That's fine. But the problem is if we don't collectively work to bring heathenry into the public eye in a genuine and beneficial way, we are leaving the door open for other people to define what heathenry is in the public eye. And by this, I am of course referring to the AFA. The AFA has absolutely no problem walking into communities and saying, hi, hello, we're here, and we're a whites-only church. And that becomes then the face of heathenry. We have seen it multiple times now where they've been covered by the media. And so when we do not do this ourselves, when we don't normalize heathenry, when we aren't giving people a positive view of who we are and what we do, we can absolutely count on people giving a negative view of who we are not, and promoting a small faction of heathenry and making it look as if that is the majority. I've heard plenty of stories of people being asked to leave establishments for having heathen tattoos, being called white supremacists, people who have no connection to the AFA, people who have absolutely no hate in their heart. But that's what happens when we allow other people to define who we are. And that's why it is so important that we do normalize heathenry and show our best face to the public. Now, what are some other obstacles to normalizing heathenry? Some of the biggest obstacles come from, as can be easily seen, modern social media depictions. Oftentimes when I tell people that I'm a heathen, some of the most common responses that I get are, is that the religion from Skyrim? Oh, so you worship Thor from Marvel. You must be a Marvel fan. Or, oh, connected to Vikings and the Last Kingdom, right? And these are obviously damaging stereotypes. And again, it's not the fault of the people who say them, rather it's the fault of us for not teaching them differently. So the first thing to stopping that form of stereotyping, that form of misunderstanding, is by educating people. And the best way we can do that is educating ourselves. If you're not intimately familiar with the Poetic Edda, you should become intimately familiar with the Poetic Edda. That way you can challenge these beliefs and misconceptions people have in an intelligent and a productive way, correcting them instead of making it into an issue, which is something I've taken to doing. When people ask me, so the religion from Marvel, I reply with no, and I proceed to give them actual information from heathenry. Now, what are some other roadblocks to normalizing heathenry? Well, for those of us who have done a lot of research, some of the biggest roadblocks can be the practices that we have, namely bloat. Now, one thing to think about is our practice of bloat is not at all different from slaughtering a farm animal or from the rituals that the Jews and the Muslims themselves have for slaughtering. And by explaining it that way, you can open the door to having a healthy and civil conversation with the people who would use that as a term of slander, who would use sacrifice as a term of slander. By opening that door, we can normalize even some of the most currently socially abnormal practices that we have in our community. So the roadblocks that we have are easier to overcome, but it requires a certain mentality. It requires the mentality of wanting to teach, the mentality of being open. And one of the hardest mentalities to overcome is a mentality of resentment. A lot of people are coming to heathenry because of a bad relationship with Christians and Christianity. But something we need to realize is not all Christians are like that. I have met very many good Christians who genuinely want to know what we believe. They're curious. They want to have the conversation. But the fact of the matter is the overwhelming majority are not going to ask first. And so instead we can take those opportunities when it's brought up. When people ask us, do you have plans for Christmas? Or can you work the holidays? Instead of skirting around the issue and attempting to be polite and avoiding the conversation, we can have the conversation there. Well, no, I don't celebrate Christmas, I celebrate Yule, or the like. And when we ask for time off, actually asking for that time off. And I know that that's a frightening idea for a lot of people. What about the backlash? Well, everyone started somewhere. And while we may face a little bit of backlash now for it, our grandchildren will have a much easier time following this religion because we took the brunt of it, because we laid down the groundwork. Because the groundwork as of right now has really not been laid down. It can be almost a detrimental conversation to have in certain employment environments to say something like, well, I'm a pagan, or well, I'm a heathen. But the fact of the matter is if we want the world to accept us, we have to be willing to take on that burden for future generations to have an easier time. And another massive roadblock to normalizing ourselves within mainstream society is the way that many new heathens tend to portray themselves on social media. Now, before I make this point, I want the LARPing community to know I am not talking about you. Do what you do, have fun, and enjoy it. I am solely talking about the people who elect to dress up, cover their faces with mascara, drawing little symbols and designs, and calling it a part of our religion. So, LARPing community, no, I am not talking to you in any capacity whatsoever. And that roadblock is exactly what I just mentioned. Instead of looking presentable, instead of just normal behavior, people tend to portray themselves with mass amounts of face paint that it's completely ahistorical. We have no reason to believe that the arch-heathens did that. Ibn Fadlan recorded in Ibn Fadlan in the Land of Darkness that the Rus would paint half of their side with green paint and designs, but we don't know what those designs were, and they most certainly weren't black up from the eyes and into the forehead. And a lot of people think and will say, what's the harm in that? You're putting a little bit of a wet blanket out there. I'm not. Because when people look up heathenry, when they research heathenry, that's what they're going to see. They're not going to see sit-down videos like this one. I hope they will one day. But that's not going to be the first thing that they're going to see right now. And if you don't believe me, Google heathenry or asatru and just look at the images. You'll begin to find it, especially on a platform like TikTok. And that's going to be their very first impression of what heathens look like, when, as a matter of fact, not all of us do. I know more people who don't look like that and who don't do that than I know who do. But it has become a popular trend to do that. So remember, if you're one of those people who's doing that and you want to keep on doing that, more power to you. But remember, you're representing more than just yourself when you're using the heathen tag. You're also representing everyone else who is using the heathen tag and who else calls themselves heathen. Remember, we're more than just an online community. A lot of us have jobs, we have social lives, we interact with the community. So help us normalize heathenry by perhaps acting just a little bit more normal in the eyes of the public. Because it is only through taking this burden on and that amount of self-sacrifice that we can build a world where our children can happily talk about our religion, proudly talk about our religion, the way that our Christian peers are allowed to talk about theirs. And like I said, the first step is opening your mind and opening your heart, being willing to have the conversation. And while it can be hard, because like I said, a lot of us come from bad situations and bad experiences with Christianity, not everyone is like that. And by treating them well and exercising the heathen aspect of hospitality, we can really help to form those bonds and normalize ourselves in modern society. Now, what are some other ways that we can normalize aside from not just skirting around conversations and being open and honest? Other ways we can normalize are the same way that other people normalize their causes and their beliefs, by interacting with our community. Open up a soup kitchen, do a food drive, do a litter cleanup, and do it in the name of your local kindred. Do it in the name of heathenry. Because when they see that, when the community sees that, you are no longer the other. Now you are a contributing member of a community who just happens to belong to a religion. And by doing this, by doing good for a community, they begin to not see us as other, but as their fellow community members. As their fellow community members who are their brothers, their sisters, their school teachers, their construction workers, their bank tellers, their librarians. By showing them that we are there, we are present, and we want to be members of the community, we humanize ourselves, opening up a channel for positive dialogue. So those are all ways that we can normalize heathenry today by doing good in our communities. So in conclusion, I really hope that everyone watching this video takes something away from it. And if you take nothing else away, take this away. Remember that we are going to have future generations of heathens. What kind of world do you want to leave them with? A world where we're still the other, where we're on the outside, where we're still treated oddly and looked oddly at? Or a world where our children can have a conversation with other children about their practices and their religions without being sneered at and laughed at? Do you want our children to grow up to be adults in a world that accepts them and takes their time off requests as if it's a normal practice instead of looking at them weird? Or do you want them to grow up in a world where they have employers who just believe they're making something up for time off? At the end of the day, it is up to us as parents, as heathens, to leave the world a better place for the generations who come after us. Thank you, everyone. My name is Gavin. This is the Orthodox Heathen, and we'll see you in our next video.